Welcome to this edition of Valor Media. This is episode number 108 for February 28th, 2022, and I'm your host, Mark Appenzeller. Almost a year ago, in March of 2021, I hosted an episode of Valor Media that I entitled The Noble Power of the Neighbor. And I did it because a dear family friend, a lady who was the next door neighbor of my parents my entire life, had just passed away. And it really hit me when she was gone because her husband, and their daughter were more than just the people who lived next door to us when I was growing up. They were as much a part of our family as if they had been aunts and uncles and cousins. They truly were people we were in relationship with. And so last year, I shared what I shared because I really felt like that family, more than almost anybody I've ever met in my life, were the perfect personification of the word neighbor. And I talked about how the word neighbor so many times is just a cliche, but they really were neighbors, and that meant a lot more than just occupying the house next door. In the introduction to that episode last year, I talked about the fact that I didn't want what I was sharing to be scripted. I just kind of wanted to emote from my heart. And that's exactly what I want to do today about a similar topic, not neighbors in specific, but relationships in general, in an episode that I'm entitling Gathered Together. Because the older I grow, the more I care about relationships. And just like the word neighbor, I think the word relationship has become a cliche. It's been trivialized to the point that all of the incredible power of that word seems to have just flown out the window. We love to talk about relationship. Christians love to talk about relationship. Now, it's true, a relationship with Jesus is the cornerstone of our Christian faith. It has to be a real relationship. And so you can't overstate how important that is. But sometimes I think when it comes to how we interact with each other on a human level, Christian or non-Christian, many people have forgotten that relationship is a two-way street. It's an art form. It's an interaction. It's a dialogue. It's all these things that when you mention just become cliches themselves. Take any of those descriptions of relationship, and they sound so trivial as to almost be stupid. And I think that's a shame. Because we're living in a unique time in human history. We're living in an unusual moment in the United States. And I really feel like right now, more than ever, we need to understand what relationship is, and we need to become very intentional about embracing it. If you heard the episode last week of Valor Media, you know that Lori Riston and her husband Stephen talked about the new normal. They reflected on all the changes and challenges that the last 2 years have brought about ever since the COVID pandemic first came on the scene. And as they mentioned last week, the influence of the pandemic was so far-reaching, it really impacted how people relate to each other. It changed the dynamic of people interacting because suddenly everyone was retreating into their own physical space. And even now, 2 years later, as many things have eased, many restrictions have been lifted, and much of society is wide open again, I think there still are a lot of people who are holding back, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the pandemic. Because even in the pre-COVID days, I think there were many people completely reluctant to engage in relationship. The reasons for that are incredibly varied, and they're deeply personal. Some people are the victims of abuse, neglect, injury brought about through relationship. That, to me, is the worst kind of injury. Relationship should be where healing takes place, not injury. And so if someone was injured in a relationship, where do you even start? How do you even convince them of the necessity of trusting the healing virtue of relationship? That's an obstacle I can't even begin to overcome in my own brain. I think it would be extremely difficult to bring someone to a place of openness and trust again when relationship was a vehicle through which they got hurt. Many people are introverted. They don't have the ability to go out and interact in a social setting and feel confident about doing it. They may be riddled with self-doubt. They may have a very low self-opinion. And the idea of having to immerse themselves in what they might perceive as a popularity contest is completely debilitating. So where do you go from there? I think the idea of relationship is crucial because without it, I really think we're just going through the motions of living. Relationship is a tricky thing because even though it can bring tremendous blessings, it's not automatic. It requires care and feeding, and sometimes there are jagged edges. That's not to scare anyone away, but it's to set the realistic expectation that for all the benefits of being in relationship, it takes a lot of work. And unfortunately, especially with the provocation of being cloistered away from the rest of society for a lot of time over the last 2 years, many people simply don't want to invest that kind of effort anymore. I think that's a phenomenal shame because it damages not only their own personal life, but their ability to really interact and touch the world in the way God created them to do so. I think relationship is so much more than just a human dynamic. It really is a spiritual precept because it's something that God emphasized pre-man. And anytime that happens, that tells me it's something that matters very deeply to God. And I know I've touched on this in other episodes of Valor Media, but I'm always fascinated by the approach that God took in creation. Because we have Him speaking forth, let there be, let there be, let there be, for all the different facets of creation, until He got to man. Now He could have simply said, let there be man, and because His word is true, and His word never returns to Him void, it would have gone out and man would have been created. But that's not how it happened. Instead, as we're told in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, He said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Now, what was He talking about? Well, the Amplified Bible translation says, then God said, let us, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, make man in our image, according to our likeness, not physical, but a spiritual personality and moral likeness. And the fact that that's how God created man tells me that relationship was a key foundational component for the entire human experience, because it wasn't simply God saying, let there be, but it was Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in that relational experience calling forth man. You know, we talk about the Lord's Prayer. I think a better description would be the disciples' prayer, because it literally was Jesus teaching us how we ought to pray. Not using the specific words, but it's more a prototype, more a pattern of how we ought to pray. And the interesting thing is, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says, on earth as it is in heaven. Well, I think part of that involves this whole idea of relationship, because as we just read, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit created man in their image, in that perfect relationship of the Holy Trinity, on earth as it is in heaven. So if the idea of us being created in the whole concept of relationship was so important that God spoke us forth that way, then I think it's equally important that we esteem relationship on earth and that we look at it with the same level of importance that God does. But so much of society seems to be moving in the opposite direction. According to an article that was published in 2018 by the Barna Group, 1 in 5 adults regularly or often feel lonely. And on average, people have 5 close friends. Now, it's funny because if you go on social media, you're immediately programmed into believing that, well, I should have several hundred friends. And maybe you have 500 friends on Facebook, but how many of them are really friends? How many of them could you honestly contact and say, hey, would you come over and help me move a sofa? That's the quickest way to tell who's a friend and who's a social media contact. In the UK in 2019, there was a survey that was commissioned by Lottoland. It was taken among British adults, and it showed that 75% of them aren't friends with any of their neighbors. It was common when I was a kid for all the neighbors to not just be aware of who each other were, but to truly be friends. My parents moved into their house in 1950. They bought it new for $6,000, and they're still living there today. The neighborhood they're living in was built 5 years after World War II ended. And my dad, like so many of the other men in that neighborhood, were World War II veterans who came home, got married, started families, and were looking for a place to raise their kids. But time went by. Kids grew up, moved off, and got married. And sadly today, of all the families that I knew in that neighborhood as a kid, my dad is the last surviving man from those original families who first moved into that development in 1950. There might be others on some of the side streets, but on the street my parents lived, he's the last one. And the whole dynamic of that neighborhood is so different now. When I go to visit my parents, it's not the street I remember as a kid. There are a lot of younger couples living there now, but it's a whole different world. The friendliness, the warmth, the interaction, the activity that I vividly remember as a kid that was so much a part of my upbringing is strangely absent. People leave their car, rush to their house, open their front door, and close it behind them. And all the stuff that I took for granted as a kid has disappeared. It's kind of a weird feeling. For any of us who are followers of Jesus Christ, I think with our whole heart, we need to embrace and commit ourselves to the concept of relationship. Remember, we're supposed to be showing the world something different, something they don't know about. And unfortunately, relationship, I think, as basic and simple as it seems, as overwhelmingly obvious as it is outside of the grasp of so many people these days. Jesus really emphasized to us the importance of relationship. Such a common verse that we've all heard a million times, but it's so true. Matthew chapter 18, verses 19 and 20. Again, truly I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. I wish we really believed that. I wish we believed that enough to really practice it and to demonstrate it for people who don't know Jesus, because I think there's no better outlet for the love and the power of the living God than through that kind of relationship, gathering together in His name and letting the world see a different way. The Apostle Paul, who in so many ways was such a great demonstration of living out this Christian faith, wrote to the Philippian church and said, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from His love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others." And you know what? The only way you'll ever even be aware of the interests of others is through relationship. I wanted to share this with you today, not because it's incredibly profound, but because it means so much to me. I think there are so many people who don't have relationship, or they don't have good relationship. It's so important to be able to demonstrate what relationship with Jesus Christ means and how it plays out when we interact with each other. I don't know where you find yourself today. Maybe you're not a believer. Maybe you are seeking something and you don't know what. And maybe you're intimidated by this whole idea of a personal relationship with Jesus. Maybe you are a believer, but as you walk out your Christian faith, you don't even know if you want to try connecting to people anymore. Have you been burned before and you don't want to go down that road again? Are you gun shy and you'd rather keep it safe than risk pain all over again? See, the thing is, through a relationship with Jesus Christ, there is an avenue to real, positive, healthy, life-giving relationship. So wherever you find yourself in this whole question of relationship today, Valor can and very much wants to help. We're all about sharing the reality of who Jesus Christ is, but we're also about connecting people with people in meaningful ways. Our personal development coaching program was created to really provide an opportunity for people to move forward beyond the obstacles that have held them back by us coming alongside as a friend, as an encourager, a coach, someone to give guidance, someone to share wisdom and insight, and also someone to listen. Our personal development coaches aren't therapists, they're not psychiatrists, they're not counselors, but they're someone who can give a perspective that might be exactly what you've been looking for to take your first steps toward making meaningful relationship part of your life. You can contact us at info@thevalorcenter.org, and someone from our team will get back in touch with you. We would like to come alongside you, help you identify the areas of your life in which you're really struggling, and walk with you so that you can transform the way you live, so that you can have the abundant life Jesus Christ talked about, and so that you truly can move from crisis to thriving. We want the Valor Media podcast to be a time where we can talk about things that enrich your life and bless you and help you. If you have questions about anything we've talked about in today's episode or in any previous episode, or better yet, if you have topics that you would like us to discuss, things that would be meaningful to you, contact us at media@thevalorcenter.org. In the whole idea of relationship, we're big about staying in touch and being connected. So please like and subscribe to this podcast. We publish a new episode each Monday. And please learn more about us on our website, www.thevalorcenter.org, or our Facebook page, Valor Ministries. We're committed to not only helping you thrive in your personal life, but in your business life as well. So also check out what we have to offer at www.valorxl.com and our Facebook page, Valor XL. If you want to get a really clear perspective on how to move from where you currently are to where you want to be, check out a book written by our executive director, Lori Riston, called You Were Made to Thrive: 7 Strategies to Move You from Crisis to Thriving. The book and its companion workbook are available on Amazon.com or at www.thevalorcenter.org/products. We want the Valor Media podcast to bless and encourage you. Would you consider blessing us by financially assisting us so that we can continue to bring you this kind of content? If so, you can make your tax-deductible donation securely online by visiting www.thevalorcenter.org and clicking on the Donate button. Or you can send a check or money order to Valor Ministries, 324 East Antietam Street, Suite 104, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21740. Thank you so much for joining me today. Don't be afraid of relationship. In Jesus Christ, you'll take the first steps toward the most amazing relationship you can possibly imagine. And by doing that, you can have healthy, safe, productive relationships as you interact with others. Please join us again next week. And until then, remember this: you were made to thrive.